Hi, MacKillop here. This video is about this guitar. I've not really given it a welcome into the world. I've done a couple of videos, but I want to really talk about it. It's quite a history, and I hope you enjoy it, even if you're not a guitar player. Okay, now I've made some notes so I don't hum and haw all the way through. So here goes. It was made by Dominique and Arno Roudhloff. I don't know how to pronounce their name, but hopefully I've remembered to write it on the screen. R-O-U-D-H-L-O-F-F. It's probably a Roudhloff, but I'm just going to call them Roudhloff for the moment. Dominique and Arno Roudhloff learned their trade at Mirko in France, a well-known centre for musical manufacture, instrument manufacture. They moved to London when it was a centre of activity for the guitar during the 1840s, and they set up shop at 81 Charlotte Street, not far from the British Museum, and after 8 years they moved up a few doors to 87 Charlotte Street. As this guitar is number 112, it was made in the earlier shops at 81 Charlotte Street. It's just still there. Thanks to pioneering research of the inestimable James Westbrook of the Guitar Museum in Brighton, I can tell you that the Ridloffs met one Henry Barelli, himself a guitar innovator, who might possibly have shared his ideas with the Roudhloffs. We are unsure who to assign the innovations found in this guitar to: Barelli, Dominique, Arnaud, all three. They called it the Melophonic guitar, for which the Roudhloffs eventually became the sole sellers. What made it different from other guitars at the time? Well, it's similar to a Panormo in looks, but the body is bigger, almost an inch bigger, and half at the bottom, half an inch round. I mean, it's deeper slightly, bigger, not as big as modern classical guitars, but bigger, and that's more air inside it, more resonance perhaps. And the most surprising thing is it goes on underneath the soundboard, and the soundboard is the most important part of the instrument. And it's very thin, and when you have a bridge glued on, lots of tension from strings, these soundboards can crack and break. So they early on they started putting support struts underneath, glued underneath the top, and called bracing. And for many years they just did what we now call ladder bracing, or transverse bracing, just straight across to give support to the soundboard. But then in Spain, don't know exactly who, there's arguments about who, but someone came up with fan bracing, where it kind of fans out like this along the bottom, so fanning out from round about here, and there'd be support around the hole as well. And that became, they discovered a different sound, and Torres used that style in Spain, and he became very famous, and a lot of makers started using it. Before Torres, he didn't invent it, but fan bracing is very much the Spanish sound. But at some point, the Roudhloffs started using X bracing. Now there's a giant X. I can feel it under here. It goes right through on both sides. And the chief advantage, asset, is that more of the soundboard could vibrate. Because these struts, even though they're light, they have a lot of glue, and the weight does contribute to deadening the soundboard a little bit, and it helps to control the tone that you want out of the instrument. So X-bracing. There's a lot of debate about who invented it, because one of the most famous guitar makers in the world became an American. C.F. Martin and Martin guitars were born, but he wasn't. They make steel string guitars with X bracing. But when C.F. Martin the first started using X bracing, he was doing it on classical guitars like this with gut strings and so on. And round about exactly the same time that the Roudhloffs brought out their X bracing. So who ripped off who? Did they really both just invent the same thing without knowing what each other was doing? Who knows? But, James Westbrook, I've mentioned already, has written an excellent article on it. I'll maybe write a description of what it is below the video on YouTube. And, he's got a lot to say about that, and he's got a book coming out at Christmas 2022, and it's going to have a lot of information, or more information on Roudhloffs. It's about 400 pages about luthiers in London in the 19th century. I don't really know what everything in the book, what it's all about, but I know there'll be more discussion of Roudhloff. Now the wood's beautiful, beautiful spruce, one of the best I've seen. In the back and sides, a Brazilian rosewood, which is banned these days, quite rightly, but the old stuff is just there, and this is some of the best I've seen. Absolutely gorgeous, and it even goes all the way up the neck. And it's gorgeous, and there's a headstock here. The tuners are original, but they're old, but they're absolutely perfect, and there's nothing wrong with them at all. It's like they're new. So I'm absolutely amazed at this guitar. I want to be on record that I don't care two hoots who invented the X-brace. I'm not the slightest bit concerned. The main thing is I've got the guitar and the X-bracing works and it sounds beautiful. But there we go. Now, where are we? Oh yeah, the big name, endorsee, if you like, the big name associated with playing these instruments is Giulio Regondi. Regondi was an incredible virtuoso performer, right from when he was a kid, pictures of him or drawings of him when he was a little kid playing concerts. And actually he came to Edinburgh, where I live pretty much, and he came twice, once when he was a little kid, prodigy, and again when he was a fully grown adult. And the same reviewer was at the second concert and wrote about it. He said, it's not all, kids who are incredibly prodigies, the word I'm looking for. Not all prodigies make it through to adulthood, still playing and enjoying their music. But Regondi did. He was brilliant when he was a kid, and he was brilliant when he was an adult. And he stayed in Edinburgh for a couple of weeks, I think, and I did the research on this 25 years ago, and I can't remember exactly how long he stayed in Edinburgh, but he stayed in Cumberland Street, for anyone who knows where that is, and he was teaching local guitarists. So that's a little Edinburgh context, but he was playing these guitars. He also played an 8-string. Stauffer in Vienna made his 8-string initially, but apparently the Roudhloffs, he asked the Roudhloffs to change the barring to X-bracing. So I'm not an expert on this, but I think that's the case. Now, updating it, Rohan Lowe, an English luthier, has a website, Lowe, Lowe, lowguitars.co.uk, and he makes the most gorgeous instruments, beautiful, and they sound as good as they look. And one of his models is a Roudhloff model, 8-string, which I'd love to get my hands on. Now, if everybody watching this buys me a coffee, there's a link below the video on YouTube, then I might be able to afford one, but you never know. Okay, and he uses X bracing on some classical guitars as well, Rohan. So it's kind of updated. They're not copies of these early instruments, but influenced by. So there we go. I'm just going to play something from a manuscript from Edinburgh. It belonged to a girl called Georgina Gregory, whose teacher was Heretsky. Heretsky came, he was Giuliani's duet partner, among other things, a fine composer, virtuoso player. He came to Edinburgh when the new town was built, classical architecture, new town, and he ended up staying for 20 years, teaching locals. And we have a manuscript from one of his pupils with some Heretsky's name involved in some of the pieces. And there's arrangements of Polish tunes, he being Polish, but also Scottish tunes. And so this is what the young lassie was playing. She lived in Ainsley Place, for Edinburghers who want to know about these things. We don't know what this is called. Somebody came up to me after a concert saying this is the Braes of Ballantine, but it's not like the Braes of Ballantine that I know. And someone else said the Yellow-Haired Laddie, which J.C. Bach arranged. It's not 100% that either, so it's kind of generic Scottish tune from the mid-19th century. Here goes. Here's another piece from the manuscript. I don't know what this is called either. It's certainly not Scottish. If you know what it is, let me know. That's it. Bye.